Do you confuse your languages, or do you think if you were to study similar languages, you would just confuse them and speak one when you're trying to speak the other? Let me start this by telling you a story about me from my own life. Back when I was living in the suburbs of Philadelphia, I was learning Korean, and at that point, I had studied Japanese for about 10 years. I started learning Japanese when I was 13 years old. And I was about 23, maybe 24. And I decided to learn Korean because I had just spent 3 years in Japan and I got to my Japanese to a really high level. And I thought, hey, Korean is a similar language to Japanese. Grammar is very similar, it has a lot of shared vocabulary. I'll try learning Korean. At that time, every day for lunch, I would go to this Japanese grocer named Maido. Highly recommended if you ever go to Ardmore outside Philadelphia. But anyway, I would go to this grocer near the lunch counter, and every day I would go there and I would always say to the woman behind the counter, I would say, "Chumon shite mo ii desu ka?" Which means, is it okay if I order? And I said that every day, but I remember one day I had just studied Korean for an hour or two, and I went to the Japanese grocer. I sat at the lunch counter, and instead of saying chumon, which is the Japanese word for order, I ended up saying jumun, which is the Korean word for order. So it came out like jumun instead of chumon. And I remember the Japanese woman, just had this look of, she had no clue what I was saying. And I was shocked. I was just completely shocked that this had happened, and I felt like learning Korean was corrupting my Japanese. My Japanese that I had worked so hard over 10 years. And 3 years in the country, I felt like it was going to get confused and messed up by studying Korean. And I would start mixing in Korean words, and no one would be able to understand me in Japanese. So after that happened, when I got home from the lunch, I just quit studying Korean altogether. I just stopped learning Korean because I really thought it was going to disturb my Japanese and corrupt it. And that's really a shame, because if I knew some of the things I found out and the techniques I had learned, maybe I would have continued studying Korean and I would be at a much further stage in Korean now than I am. And that would be such a great thing. So it is a shame that I quit learning Korean, because it's not the case that the Korean was going to corrupt my Japanese. Now I'm going to teach you how you can study similar languages and not mix them up, not confuse them, and be able to learn them each in their own right so that you can learn them even at the same time. So, in my case, if there's a specific example of something that you messed up or mixed up, for example, I used the Korean word jumun instead of the Japanese word chumon. In this case, what I should have done is I should have written out the Japanese phrases and the Korean phrases right next to each other. And then I should have looked at them side by side. And then I could have seen the differences between them and really impressed in my mind which belonged to which were the Japanese words, which were the Korean words. And then I could even read the sentences over and over again, like chumon shite mo ii desu ka? And I could impress that into my mind that that's the Japanese way of saying it, and then I would say the equivalent in Korean, and that's the Korean way of saying it. And that would help prevent me from mixing up those words in that specific example. But in general, what you want to do is you want to practice switching back and forth between speaking your languages. So what I should have done is I should have practiced speaking in Japanese for 5 minutes, and then immediately speaking in Korean for 5 minutes, and then even speaking in another language like Spanish for 5 minutes, and just practice using each language and flipping between them in a short period of time. And so when you do make a mistake, because you will make a mistake at the beginning, you will switch them up, mix them up. When you do make an error and you notice this error, you don't want to beat yourself up about it. You don't want to say, oh, I'm such an idiot, I can't believe I used the Korean word when I should have used the Japanese word, or that person's so confused because I used the Korean word instead of the Japanese word. This is so horrible, I can't believe I'm so embarrassed. You don't want to go into that. Instead, you just want to think, okay, I made a mistake, I mixed up the two words. Think of the correct term in the correct language, and then just move on to speaking in that language and continue on with what you're saying. That's the appropriate way to do it. Don't feel embarrassed, don't beat yourself up, just correct yourself and move forward. And basically what you're doing is, this takes time because you're training a new skill. It is a skill to speak different languages in close proximity to each other. It is a skill to flip between different languages very quickly. And it is a skill to speak one language and not mix it up with another language. So you will need to train this skill, but like any skill, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it and the more natural it will become. At this point in time, I don't mix up any languages, even when they're very similar, like the Romance languages or the Germanic languages or the Scandinavian languages. And what I've just told you is kind of the principle of my book. This is the comparative grammar of Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. But I wrote this book so that you could learn these three languages at the same time. And the principle is, I wanted to put a lot of sentences and grammar points side by side so that you can really see the differences, and then you can learn them that way by comparing them and contrasting them. You can see how they're different, how they're similar, and by seeing them side by side, that helps ingrain into you which belongs to which. So I highly recommend you get this book if you're studying one of these languages, or if you're just a language fanatic like I am. You'll probably love this book because it compares the languages, and who doesn't like looking at languages side by side. In the back, I even went further, and I have both versions of Norwegian, Bokmål and Nynorsk, as well as Faroese and Icelandic. So yeah, pick up this book. It's on Amazon. But something else I'll mention is, when I was telling people about this book, I received a comment from someone. And they said, don't try to learn Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish at the same time, because in my entire life, I have never met someone who spoke these three languages without mixing them up and speaking some cringy mix of the three. And I thought that was interesting, because this person basically said there was no way that it was possible to learn Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish and speak them properly. She thought that you would just speak a cringy mix throughout your entire life, which I don't agree with. And the reason I don't agree with it is because those people who may mix up those three languages, the reason why they mix it up is because they don't care to put in the time and effort to properly differentiate them. If you did use the techniques that I just discussed, for example, putting them side by side, training yourself by speaking in one and then another and then another, you will be able to speak these three languages properly without mixing them up. For example, there are other similar languages like Spanish, Portuguese, and Catalan, but I rarely hear people saying that you'll just speak a cringy mix of these three languages if you attempt to learn them. But for some reason, this woman thought that Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish were special somehow, and that you would mix them up. But no, I think if you put in the appropriate time for each one and make the effort of differentiating them, you can speak them separately and without mixing them up. And a great way to do this, a great way to train your speaking ability in the three languages, is to speak to AI. I use a site called yourteacher.ai. I highly recommend it. But basically, you can speak Swedish or Spanish or whatever language into your phone, and then the AI will correct your speech and then speak back to you to continue the conversation. The good thing about this is, let's say you're speaking Swedish and you accidentally say a Norwegian word. The AI will actually pick up on that and it will tell you that you used Norwegian and then give you the correct Swedish word in the sentence. So, for example, if you're trying to learn Italian and you have really good Spanish, let's say you're speaking in Italian but you accidentally use a Spanish word, the AI will pick up on that and tell you, no, that word is in Spanish. Here's the Italian word. This is how you would say the full sentence in Italian. So yeah, yourteacher.ai, I highly recommend it, but that's another way that you can improve your speaking ability, especially if you're learning similar languages and you want to be able to speak them properly without mixing them up. The AI will correct you every time, which is a big difference from, say, a personal tutor. I find humans tend to get tired of correcting you after every sentence, but the AI never gets tired, and the AI will correct you after every single sentence. So yeah, that's it. I hope it helps you. I hope you realize that you can learn similar languages without mixing them up. Just keep to the techniques I taught you, and be sure to train the skill and take the time to learn the skill to speak the languages separately. And yeah, pick up a copy of my book if you haven't already. So that's it. Subscribe if you haven't already. I have more language content coming out soon. Thank you so much, and good luck with your studying.